discussion on the final day of U.S. presidential election. We are joined in Washington, D.C., Mr. Robert Moran, a partner at Brunswick Group consultancy firm and also former senior project director with the Public Opinions Strategies. Also in Washington, D.C., joining us, Mr. Clifford Young, president of Ipsos Public Affairs. In Iowa, we are having Professor Timothy Hagel, professor of political science at the University of Iowa. Gentlemen, welcome to the three of you. Have you already voted? Professor?
I'm voting at 2.
Okay. I've heard some very different...
I've already voted too.
All right, great. Thank you. Let's talk about it. You don't have to reveal your political identity, but now let's go into some details. Both candidates pushed for the final day. Will that have an impact on voters' decisions? Let's go to Mr. Moran first, briefly.
Well, I think Donald Trump has a narrow electoral path, and it's become narrower over the last 72 hours or so. It's Hillary Clinton's race to lose. She's winning or ahead in the popular vote, as most national surveys suggest. There are a number of tight states, however. Nevada, Florida, North Carolina could be very tight. And we'll see what happens.
All right. What do you think, Mr. Young? Final push, gonna bring out some votes, change the picture?
On the margins, perhaps. I agree with Mr. Moran. It's typical in American elections to that final few days to push out the votes. It's all about turnout, and you want to get your people out to vote on Election Day. But I think the polling evidence is strong to suggest that the election has tilted towards Clinton. And for your viewers out there, I would say the following. Remember, in the United States, it's not a popular vote take all.
Right.
We have an electoral college, so the vote each state is really important. I would focus on 3 states, Florida, Ohio, and North Carolina.
All right.
For Trump to be competitive at all, he has to take all 3. So we might know very early on, when the polls close, which way the election's tilting.
Right. Our viewers around the world have been very well educated over the past 16 months, to say the least, about your campaign and your election system. Let's go to Professor Hagel. Obviously, both candidates seem to have certain kind of relief expressed in different ways for their final words. Mr. Donald Trump was saying, "This is it," he was saying to the voters. Of course, he's trying to get the votes out. Well, Mrs. Clinton was suggesting, "I've been working so past the 16 months. This is what I really want to achieve." What do you make of this very mixed feelings, almost, of these two candidates? Some of the lowest campaigns in American presidential election history, and the longest, shall I say, also.
You're right. It's a very long campaign. It's very tiring. I think most people, even those of us that follow politics on a regular basis, we just don't realize how difficult it is, that their time is not their own anymore. That can be particularly difficult for somebody like, say, Donald Trump, who maybe has been able to basically determine his own agenda, his own schedule, whereas somebody like Hillary Clinton, that maybe she's used to that a little bit more. But it's a very difficult thing for the candidates. Of course, the one that wins is now going to embark on at least a 4-year journey that's going to be just as difficult for them, if somewhat different.
Well, we'll see also how the country holds itself after the election, but that shall we put it to another day for tomorrow. For now, let's still discuss this issue about who is going to get the biggest vote, whether it's electoral or just from the public. Does issues still matter during this presidential election? Let's take a look at some of the opinions and also stances coming from these two candidates. The two leading candidates have different stances on a number of key issues. On immigration, Clinton wants to give illegal immigrants a path towards citizenship, while Trump wants to crack down on illegal immigrants, as he said, and limit legal immigration, build a wall, for example. On foreign policy, Hillary Clinton supported the U.S. war in Iraq and wants to strengthen the U.S. military presence abroad, while Trump says U.S. allies should pay for their own defense. When it comes to trade, both candidates lean towards protectionism, quote unquote. Clinton recently turned her back on Obama's Trans-Pacific Partnership trade deal, at least to a certain extent. Trump says he opposed the idea from the very start. Does issues, do issues still matter? Professor Hagel, last moment at the decision of the voters.
I think they do to a certain extent, and certainly there will be elements of the population that care about particular issues, whether they're single-issue voters or not. The problem election has been so mired in the personal aspects, whether it's the scandals of one candidate or the other, that it's hard sometimes for those issues to break through.
What do you think, Mr. Moran? Issues or personalities?
Well, since the advent of radio and television, American politics have become, generally speaking, more candidate-centered. And in American culture now, we've had almost a merger of politics and entertainment, which makes them more candidate-centered. However, I think issues still matter quite a bit. If you look at white, non-college educated voters, sort of blue-collar voters, the fact that Donald Trump has become more populist, more trade protectionist, that is a big issue. I think Donald Trump is wrong about that, and I think history will disprove him, his theory on trade protectionism, but that is an issue that he's used to quite some effect in the election. Issues do matter.
The demographic change is certainly happening in the United States. Mr. Yang, we see Mrs. Clinton, together with the Democratic Party, seem to attract a lot of support coming from non-white voters, and also from women, for example, and also from different kinds of people with higher education. But Mr. Trump, on the other hand, white male education no more than college. So what do you make of this democratic shifts going on inside the country? Is it going to be really representing the party demographic shifts, or these two candidates only?
No. The profile that you cited there on the Democratic and Republican side are basically discrete bases. Those are their traditional bases. I think the interesting thing looking forward a bit is to understand where the demographics are going. Excuse me. If you look at the long-term demographic data and the trends, we're increasingly becoming a non-white country. Indeed, 76% of older people are white, while the newest cohort of young people that were just born over the last few years, the majority of them are non-white. So obviously that changing demographics, which obviously favors the Democrats, is conditioning and changing the political landscape in front of us right now.
So is there going to be any dark horse this time, as they say, Professor Hagel, for example, Latino Americans? Are they really likely to be the deciding force behind the election now?
Well, you can look at a variety of demographic groups and see how they vote. I think that sometimes there's a little bit too much emphasis placed on that, even though it is a fairly important consideration. Really, it's more a matter of the economic situation of whatever that group happens to be in, I think, is the key factor. And that's been that way for a number of presidential elections, that really it boils down to economics, pocketbook issues, as we say. But you're right, that certain groups, particularly Latinos, Hispanics, are a growing segment of the population, and they tend to get out and vote too. Right now, at least, they don't tend to favor heavily, or at least not as heavily as blacks, one party over the other. So that's why there is certainly a bit of an opportunity for the Republicans, but they need to at least embrace that opportunity and do a better job of reaching out to that group as well as others.
Okay, let's talk about some of the three states that the three of you keep on talking about, which is Florida, Ohio, and North Carolina. Okay, to help us to understand, likely to be some magic moves before we find the final answer, before the election comes to an end. Mr. Moran.
Okay, let me break it down for you.
Okay.
Florida is a swing state. It's very tight. Florida has early voting. Miami-Dade County, the epicenter of Latino voters in South Florida, has turned out at a record level, which would be good for Hillary Clinton, but the white vote has also spiked in early turnout. I think it'll go down to the wire, but I think it's Hillary Clinton's to lose. You need to look at Miami-Dade, the I-4 corridor between Tampa and Orlando, and also the I-10 corridor in North Florida, which tends to be more conservative. Ohio leads Trump. African-American turnout has been weaker across the Midwest, across the Big Ten industrial states. So I think that's an open question. I think Ohio likely leads Trump.
Right.
If it's really close and swings towards Clinton, of course, the race is over. I think Nevada is a very interesting test case to look at. Nevada is a lean right, lean conservative Republican state, has a lot of Latino population. 28% of Nevada is Latino. And turnout there has been extremely high in Las Vegas and Clark County. Right. And if that's the case, then Nevada may already be out of reach for Team Trump, but we'll have to see. And then finally, North Carolina, I think, will be so close it could go to
Really? As close as that? Mr. Young, agree?
Yes.
As close as that?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I agree with Mr. Morin. I mean, it's a nail biter in North Carolina. Once again, just re-emphasizing, our polling shows and polling in general shows that probably Ohio tilts Republican. Florida is sort of a coin flip once again.
Right.
But really, really, for everyone out there, look at North Carolina. In my mind, if that goes blue, the night is over. And what's very interesting about North Carolina is that a few elections ago, it was a red state. It was a Republican state. And over time, over the last decade, a little bit longer, you've had a lot of migration from northern cities in the Research Triangle. So we have a changing state there, one that could go blue and really define the night tonight.
Professor Hagel, I wouldn't want you to go into details once again as the other two gentlemen just did, but help us to understand from your political science perspective that the few counties' choices will eventually decide the fate of America in terms of choosing a president. Some say to say the least, interesting.
It is, and again, it goes back to our electoral college system in that some states tend to lean one way, some states reliably tend to lean the other way, and then you have a set of swing states, and it basically gives each state an opportunity. Our system generally gives each state an opportunity to weigh in on the process, to not be overwhelmed, particularly by really, really large states like New York and California. Now, it just happens that also a very large state like Florida is a swing state as well, because the population politically seems to be evenly divided, or at least that there are enough people that are not tied to one party or another, the independents, that they vote not based on party loyalty but on who they see as the best candidate. And it's those people that the candidates have to convince, and sometimes they're convinced to one party's candidate and sometimes the other.
All right. Another thing that the rest of the world is extremely interested in is how could the polls be so different from one to the other? If I could just read out some of those to you. For example, the Reuters Ipsos poll you have over there, 90% for Clinton.
That's our poll, yes.
I know, 90% for Clinton. However, if you look at the New York Times, it's only 46% versus 42.9% for Trump. That's the latest I got. And also BBC poll, 48% vis-a-vis a little bit lower for Mr. Trump. So how could the polls be so different from one another? That's the first question. And can we still rely on polls anymore? Mr. Morin, I'd like you to go first. I'd like Mr. Young to prepare for himself. Okay, go ahead, Mr. Morin.
Okay.
Sure. So if you go to, if you visit large poll aggregator websites, you'll see that actually the polling is very similar. There are not nearly the wide shifts that you might expect. So, for example, Hillary Clinton leads in 9 of the last surveys. If you go state by state, most states show a clear tilt in the polling, just by studying the last, say, 10 to 15 states. But a critical thing to understand about polling is pollsters are working very hard to attempt to model the universe of voters who are either early voting or will show up on election day. We do not have mandatory or compulsory voting in the United States, and so turnout levels vary, and it becomes the challenge is having a good sense of who will or who will not show up. And depending on how you model the electorate, you may move that vote share a couple points either direction. But I actually think the polling at the state level and national level has been quite good. Okay, there we go. And what about you, Mr. Young? Your turn now. Explain. 90%.
Yeah, well, I agree with a little bit that number, but I agree with Mr. Morin. The best thing to do, we're in this new age of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of polls. Indeed, there'll probably be something like 20,000 polls conducted during the electoral cycle this round. In 2012, it was about 12,000. So lots of polls. So what you should always do is take the average of all the polls. That's the best thing to do. And the average is about 5 points for Clinton. Now, you lead for Clinton, and that's a pretty solid lead, and that's been the case for the last week or so.
Right.
When you cited the Reuters Ipsos poll, actually that 90% is 90% probability that she'll win. Right? We were forecasting the probability of her victory, but we believe the vote share will be about 5 points in her favor, just to clarify that. But indeed, I think the polling, we'll see, we'll have probably a pretty good cycle. Obviously, there always could be some sort of surprise, and per Mr. Morin's point, it's always about turnout. So if you look at Brexit, the reason the polls got Brexit wrong is that we got the wrong sort of people. We modeled the wrong sort of people on election day. So younger people didn't go out to vote, and older people did. And so what have we done here in the United States? We've done a lot of, as pollsters, a lot of sensitivity analysis to understand what's going on, and we're comfortable with the 5-point lead.
Okay, and before we go, very important question. This campaign, as we all understand, has been one quite dramatic, to say the least. Professor Hagel, what about the result of the election? Will one candidate or the other candidate refuse to accept the fact? Will there be more drama before we lead to the final result of the election? And how would the country react to that? Are Americans ready for that? And how are we going to see the result? Is it likely to be early result as long as the 3 states are being deciding their votes? Or this is likely to be a very dirty, long battle until the very end?
Well, that's what we have to wait and see tonight, because if some of those states like North Carolina and Florida and Ohio are very close, or if they tend to go for Trump, it could be in for a long night. If it seems right away that Florida has gone for Clinton and Ohio is maybe goes for Trump, but North Carolina goes for Clinton, then it's probably be an early night. And the real key as far as accepting it is how close the race generally is. If all of a sudden it ends up that clearly you've got that 5-point lead as suggested for Clinton, then that will be pretty clearly that a victory for her. 1 state or 2 states that are closer than that, it probably won't stop people from accepting a Clinton victory. And we'll have to see what Trump does. He's a lot of talk, and maybe we'll see he'll go ahead and say, well, I can clearly see that I lost. We'll see what happens there. But on the whole, if it's a very close night, then yeah, we could be in for a late night, and there could be some challenges if in fact North Carolina, as the others indicated, was a toss-up. And so we just have to wait and see. And the system really isn't perfect by any means, and so that means when you do have a very close election, it can cause some trouble, but hopefully that won't be the case. All
right, very briefly from the others, Mr. Morin, of course, Mr. Trump has always been saying the system has been rigged from time to time. So the danger is whether he's going to accept the result if it's not in his favor?
Look, if the elections in some of these key swing states, Florida, North Carolina, Nevada, etc., are close, I can see Donald Trump not conceding. I think there's a chance that he just simply doesn't concede at all, that he lawyers up and tries to take legal action that would not be outside of his character. I think that would be deeply harmful to the United States and its process. But the U.S. has a system designed to take a lot of these things, and I think we'll be okay.
Okay. Mr. Young, final words from you, 20 seconds if you can, sir.
Yeah, I think no matter who wins, they're going to go into a divided, polarized government. And what's the real meaning of this election? We haven't talked about it. Kind of 30,000-foot view. A supermajority of Americans believe the system is broken, that the rich are getting richer, that believe that traditional parties and politicians don't represent them, and that isn't going away. And so that will still be here to stay. There'll be a heightened degree of populism, and I believe uncertainty looking forward, even after Election Day.
That's a long battle ahead, to say the least. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being with us on the Election Day. Thank you so much, Clifford Young, Robert Morin, and Timothy Hagel. Really appreciate, gentlemen, for being with us. And thank you for voting and also express your political view. Thank you. That is all the time we have for today. If you like